character of Salome was first characterized by his physique and, in other words, by his body and especially by his beauty. Indeed, as early as chapter 1, Flaubert describes her as delicate and beautiful. In addition, the author gave particular importance to her body, talking, for example, about her color, her eyes, her mouth, her waist. At the end of chapter 2, we were also told that her arm was charming and graceful, also it was clumsy. Then in chapter 3, Flaubert described her graceful body when she was dancing in front of Herod. He spoke to her successively about the different parts of her body, starting with her head and ending with her feet. It is during this dance that Salome is compared to her mother, saying, among other things, it was Herodias, as in yours, or that she danced like the priestesses of India. Then, Salome could be described by the many tricks she wore, especially during her dance. Indeed, Flaubert imagined her with a blush veil, silk, a goldsmith's belt, sparkling clothes. All these things are very rare and expensive, especially the hummingbird down slippers. It was not only in chapter 3 that Salome used artifice. Indeed, she wore some as early as chapter 1, as when we are told that she wore veils, pendants, or a calamitous tunic with an emerald tassel peplum. She was even compared in chapter 1 to a woman, when Flaubert says she was dressed like a woman. Salome would thus not be the same if she was not dressed with precious accessories. Finally, the figure of Salome was considered bewitching because in chapter 1, Herodias was talking to her husband, who was no longer listening, when he saw a young girl who was none other than Salome. She was also bewitching because it said that flames were lighting up in Herod's eyes, that his breathing was getting stronger, and that he was watching her movements as if he had fallen in love with her. Then, in chapter 3, when she danced, Herod lost himself in a dream, and people used to hold back nomads' breasts, palpitated with lust. Salome thus succeeded in charming Herod. One says besides that she turned during her dance like the rhombus of the witches in chapter 3. The fact of having written the word witch is in keeping with the idea of bewitchment and charm. It was thanks to this that he told her that she could have everything she wanted, and therefore, among other things, as the head of Yucatan.
From the tale Herodias by Flaubert, a French writer. In his tale, Flaubert describes Salome in different ways. He talks about the way in dressed. He describes her in shiny tunic with some emerald hanging from it. He also describes her hair tied between blue laces. Her hair must have been as wavy as stone, since Flaubert always described her with her hand in her hair. Later in this text, for Salome's famous dance scene, he described her instead with a blue veil. To each he added a belt, a things in bird-down slippers. But when Salome really starts to dance, Flaubert will make her take off the blue veil and she was wearing. Each leads us to believe that the strongly uncover herself to attract the attention of others to her. Flaubert will also describe Salome physically. He will give her a lot of character. To begin with, describe her as a person with young and graceful but rather rounded arms. Her eyes are arched and makeup, just as her lip and forehead look like marble because it's so pale. When she dances, Salome is wearing. At that moment, he described her resembling her mother as she used to be. She was younger. Flaubert described her as light as butterfly. Her feet mingle and follow each other. Then comes the perception of the other character. Flaubert will describe the feeling of the other character as seen by Salome. The first time Herod Antipas sees Salome, he will think she is a slave, but already a grieving king and flames appear in her eyes. During the dance scene, Salome is admired by everyone. She is subject to screaming, and all the other characters desire her strongly. Salome is compared to a famous Roman meme by Vitellius, Aulus him vomits, il Herod Antipas dreams. Salome is thirdly the image of the woman of the desire and charms.
Salome physically was a rather tall woman and thin. The aesthetic canon of its time during his dance, which is unfolded in front of a crowd of people. His lips were covered of paint. The eyebrow of this young woman they made to be very dark, of black shade. She had a very dark gaze similar to the color of the heart of Beelzebub. His performance made him think on his plate found comparable to vapor on white marble. She probably had such long hair that weighed her seemed too heavy. This dancer had a very developed gesture. Her movement, identical to the elasticity of a snake, impressed the spectator. When she stood up, or even when she twisted the waist during his dance, observers applauded. Under her belly swing with swell ripples, marking both her bust trembled. She moved very gracefully. Her feet passed one in front of the other to the rhythm of the flute, and a pair was naked. Salome looked as light as a butterfly, like a nomadic soul, and seeming ready to take plague. This woman was dressed like the Roman, in a tunic calamitry with emerald, tassel, peplum, and tongue blue hair enclosed her large, heavy hair. She wore a veil lushy, under which she hid her shirt and head, but one could distinguish the arch of its eyes, the chalcedony of its hair, the whiteness of his skin. She covered her shoulder with a thin scarf. Pigeon strewed his loin, held a gold mist belt. She wore black underpants that were straight with mandrake and summerhoe. As split, she molded her little hummingbird to silver.
Was a young girl with a delicate color and a thin mouth.
She had a large head of hair. Salome was attractive. All the men were at her feet, like the tetrarch, who, just by looking at her naked arm, characterized it as charming and graceful. His arm was so, as if turning in ivory by Polycletus. In other words, it was as if it had been carved. Salome was very supple. She strained herself in an elastic way, and during her dance already, just by her physique but also by her dancing skill, she had managed to bewitch the audience. She danced like a goddess. Salome looked like a young Herodias. She had everything for her and could make the most of it. The others had admiration for her. The tetrarch watched her movements and devoured her with his gaze, yet he still had questions about her. During her dance, some were surprised and others hypnotized. She was compared by the guests to the priest of India or to a flower when a storm broke out. They looked at her, stared at her, criticized her, on the contrary, admired her. Salome had all men at her feet just by her beauty and what she radiated. Finally, she could be dressed like the Romans in a tunic with peplum, with emeralds and stars that hid her hair. When she danced, she was dressed with a piece of silk that covered her shoulders and held to her loins with a goldsmith's belt. She wore hummingbird down slippers. She was covered with a veil that she removed when she began. Salome had colorful lips and dark eyebrows. Her clothes produced sparks that set the guests on fire.
Role portrait. Salome aroused feeling and lust in the characters around him. She was overflowingly charming. She was light. During her dance, she was restless but talented, enough for the audience, especially Antipas, who was overwhelmed. She has been compared to Wandering Soul. Salome was a rather mysterious and curious character, which developed the tetrarch's interest in her. Salome was a silent person. She intervened very little in the dialogues, and this was also what made her mysterious. In fact, the apparitions of Herodias' daughter were very brief, and this aroused curiosity both in the reader and in Antipas in particular, who did not know who she was at first, thinking that she was a slave of Herodias. The physical portrait and movements. Salome had a very advantageous physique in the eyes of Antipas. She was brimming with energy, suppleness, and elasticity, especially during her dance, which was explained by the fact that she was young. She was agile, and her skin was compared to ivory, which is a very rare material today, and even more so at the time of the meet. All this made her beautiful, and the dance passage only confirmed and further clarifies her body, which was of an incomparable delicacy. One could see during her dance that she had the rhythm of the skin and knew exactly where to put her foot or how to move her arms, which had been visibly retained by the author because he was precise in every movement of her dance. Antipas, he was ecstatic at the sightless glance towards Salome. It was only really important during his dance, which had an effect of discovering the character, even if the passage describing Salome's dance only lasts a short time.
The character of Salome is revealed gradually in this tale. She is first described like a young girl income to all, but traveling with its belts and goldsmith pendants under an umbrella. The flames will light up in the eyes of those who watch it, and when she will dance later at the table from Tetrarch, the shining from his hair skips the fabric of her back shimmered, of her clothes sprang invisible sparks. She will unite again the men. The description highlights the lexical field of the lights of the glows. Flaubert then puts forward the body of Salome. This lexical field is highly developed. Salome, girl of Herodias, is younger, to heavy hair, to delicate color, and at the small mouth. In this tale, we see or we guess her hips, her necks, her size, her naked arm. Flaubert then puts her body in movement by the way of the dance and of her veil or hide, the breast and the head, and leaves appears both of her eyes, her hairs, the whiteness of her skin, covering his shoulder. His distinctions, her attitude were expressed sighs, twisted her waist, swung her belly, her feet did not stop, she was overturning from all sides. Finally, represents Salome like a character mystic and fantastic, with numerous comparisons. She danced like the priestess from India, like the Nubian of characters, like the Bacchantess of Lydie. She turned Frenchically, like the rhombus of witches, with funeral sounds of the Gingras. The writer, whose words transporting us in the fantastic vision, get lost in a dream more light than a butterfly, a soul vagabond, ready at flying away, giving even at her body exceptional capabilities. Her chin was close to the floor. She threw herself on the hand, the heels in the hair, like a beetle. Her neck and her vertebrates made a right angle, her eyes almost terrible.
Salome was a young girl dressed like a woman, wearing a delicate collar, a calamistus tunic with an emerald tassel pelpum, and blue stripes enclosed her hair. She was simple, graceful, and from the hips to the nape of the neck, her entire waist was titled to straighten in an elastic manner. She also had young and charming arms as turned in ivory by Polyclete. Salome was dressed in a bluish veil that hid his chest and head. One could only see the arches of her eyes, the chalcedony of her ears, and the whiteness of her skin. Her black boxer shorts were strewn with mandrakes, and she snapped little hummingbird down slippers. At the top of the stage, she took off her veil and began the dance. With her high lips closed, she twisted her waist and swayed her body with ripples of swales. Salome was also represented as being rich and having money because the feast hall had 3 naves, like a basilica, which were separated by columns of Algonine wood with bronze capitals covered with carvings. There were 2 galleries and a third with gold filigree. Salome was also dressed in a calamitous tunic with an emerald peplum.
Girl who dressed like a Roman woman with a tunic. Herod devoured her with his eyes. She seemed to have the physique of goddess, a perfect body, with her waist who was boring with flexibility, a manner extensive. She hid it behind her clothing, but it was possible to distinguish her perfect form. She had white skin, her lips were colored, her eyes brown were very dark. She had terrible eyes. This young girl looked like her mother Herodias when she was more young. Salome was an extraordinary dancer. She danced off the rhythm of the instruments. She was moving her whole body with eyes almost closed. She moved her breast of stomach, her arms with suppleness and delicacy. Her body swayed in all directions like a ship in the middle of a storm. She was leaning so far back was her chin burst the ground. She turned upside men of all age with this dance. Salome was a seductive woman. Only with her physique flames lit up in Herod's eyes. Then with her dance she made him dream, but she was not the only. Nomads who the obstinate order placed overshadowed by disputes, and many others had heard that would speed up, and they shuddered with desire as they watched her dance like goddess.
The arms of Salome were a bit rounded, young and charming. They was clumsy but also gracious. When she was inclined, it was with elasticity. Her lips were painted, her eyebrows were black, her eyes were terrifying, and her skin was very pale. She looked exactly like her mother, Herodias. When Salome traveling, she had a large basket filled with clothes, belts, veils, jewels. She was wearing a tunic with emeralds like the Romans, and her hair were tied with loose straps. For dance, she was wearing a blue veil, hiding her head and her chest, a silk on her shoulders, held by a belt, and little slippers that she was made clack before start dance. She was starting to dance, a foot in front of the other in rhythm. When she was dancing, she seemed really light as she was flying. Her dance brought joy to the spectator and seduced the man who was watching. Salome was dancing with agility. She was twisting in all directions. Her movement was slow and languorous. When she was dancing, she was shining.
A young girl with a very white skin. Her hair was so imposing that she often put her hand in it. Her eyebrows were kicked black, and underneath her charming eyes, on the lower part of her face, there was a beautiful little lips. She was a young girl with beautiful shapes, a very supple body, and she was light as a feather. During her dance, she wore diamonds in her ears. Her head was covered with a colorful veil. On her shoulders, a scroll of silk. Under her dress, she wore black pants, and to hold her dress at her hips, she wore a rather luxurious belt. When she danced, you could hear the sound of her sandals on the floor. She was dressed like the Romans. Salome's entry into the hall before he danced was a surprise and unexpected. She was stepped onto a stage and started to dance in a very graceful and sensual way. She twisted her waist in all directions, made circles with her belly, and moved her chest. She moved around like a tree in a storm. Her dance was so enchanting that the tetrarch was ready to offer her, seemed dear to her eyes.